Marcus Thane's boots made wet sucking sounds against the landing platform's synthetic surface as he descended the transport ramp, and he decided this was probably a metaphor for his entire life lately. Behind him, the colony ship's engine cycled down with a groan that sounded like relief, exhaustion, or possibly indigestion. He couldn't tell anymore. 3 months in cryosleep hadn't been kind to his ability to distinguish between mechanical noises and his own digestive tract. Voltoria Prime spread out before him in a configuration that his earth-trained eyes couldn't quite process. The architecture seemed to grow from the ground rather than sit on it, all flowing curves and surfaces that shifted color in the dual sunlight. His fellow colonists stumbled past him, equally disoriented, clutching their pathetic allotments of personal belongings. Marcus had a duffel bag containing 2 changes of clothes, his agricultural certifications, now worth approximately nothing, and a temperature-controlled case of heirloom seeds that represented 6 generations of family farming. The farm itself was currently underwater back on Earth, along with most of the Midwest, which was why he was here accepting the Voltorian Cooperative's generous offer to please, for the love of whatever gods might be listening, come help them figure out crop rotation. The processing line moved with efficiency that bordered on aggressive. Voltorian officials, immediately recognizable by their elegant pointed ears that rose from their heads like organic question marks, scanned identification chips embedded under colonist skin. Marcus watched one official's ears twitch in what might have been amusement as a nervous colonist ahead of him tried to explain why his medical records listed extreme cheese intolerance as a critical health concern. When Marcus reached the checkpoint, the official barely glanced at him before waving a device that made his forearm tingle. Agricultural Specialist, cleared for Integration Track 3, Housing Assignment Delta 7, report to Cultural Integration Office within 48 hours. The words came out in perfectly inflected English, though Marcus could see the translation collar at the Voltorian's throat pulsing with soft light. Cultural integration, Marcus asked, trying to shift his duffel to a less awkward position. That sounds ominous. The official's ears rotated forward slightly, which Marcus would later learn meant friendly attention. Standard orientation. You'll find it enlightening. Next. Delta 7 turned out to be a prefabricated housing unit that Marcus would charitably describe as cozy, and honestly describe as a shipping container with delusions of grandeur. It did, however, have running water that came out hot, a sleeping platform that didn't require cryogel, and a window overlooking what appeared to be an actual park with actual trees that definitely weren't native to any Earth ecosystem. The trees had leaves that oriented themselves toward both suns independently, creating a disorienting shimmer effect that made him slightly nauseous if he watched too long. He spent the first day unconscious, the second day discovering that Voltorian food was perfectly edible but seasoned with something that made everything taste vaguely purple, and the third day finally trudging to the Cultural Integration Office, because his embedded chip had started sending polite but increasingly firm reminder pulses to his nervous system. The office occupied a building that seemed to be trying very hard to look welcoming and non-threatening. Soft curves, warm lighting, furniture that adjusted itself to human proportions as he approached. Behind a desk that appeared to be made of living sat a Voltorian woman whose ears were pierced with small crystals that chimed softly when she moved. Marcus Thane, Agricultural Specialist, arrived on Transport Wave 3, she said, smiling in a way that involved too many teeth to be entirely comfortable. I'm Kess. I'll be facilitating your cultural orientation. Is this where you tell me about the mandatory brain scanning, or the ritual combat, or whatever surprising thing makes colonists panic? Marcus dropped into a chair that immediately began conforming to his spine in ways that felt intrusive. Kess's ears tilted back in what he was learning to recognize as laughter. No brain scanning. We find it damages the tissue. The ritual combat is optional. She pulled up a holoscreen with a gesture, her fingers leaving light trails in the air. "You've been flagged as an ideal candidate for our cultural exchange program." Flagged sounds bad. Flagged is what happens to suspicious packages and questionable rashes. Flagged as in identified, Kess continued, her ears doing a little rotation that suggested amusement. "Your psychological profile, compiled from your application data, medical scans, and personal history, indicates strong compatibility markers for integration." Marcus watched data scroll across the holoscreen, most of it incomprehensible. Integration into what exactly? Voltorian society operates on connection networks that go beyond professional relationships. We've found that successful colony integration occurs most effectively when colonists form personal bonds with local populations. Kess manipulated the holoscreen, bringing up what looked like a questionnaire of terrifying length. "We've developed compatibility algorithms over several thousand years of interstellar diplomacy. The accuracy rate is 0.987. You're talking about dating." Marcus felt his brain trying to catch up with the conversation. "You're trying to set me up." The program encompasses various relationship structures, including but not limited to romantic partnerships, deep friendships, mentorship bonds, and formal kinship arrangements. In your case, based on preliminary analysis, you're flagged for potential matching in the traditional bonding category. Traditional bonding. Marcus repeated the words slowly, testing them for hidden traps. "Marriage, in your cultural context." Kess said it so casually she might have been discussing agricultural equipment, though the Voltorian interpretation includes legal, social, and biological components that differ somewhat from Earth traditions. Marcus stared at her, then at the holoscreen, then back at her. "You want me to marry an alien?" "A Voltorian," Kess corrected gently, "and only if compatibility metrics indicate mutual benefit." The questionnaire assesses psychological, philosophical, and practical alignment across 743 factors. 743. Marcus felt laughter building in his chest, the kind that emerged when reality became too absurd to process normally. "This is insane. This is science." Kess's ears pricked forward earnestly. "We've eliminated approximately 94% of relationship dysfunction through proper algorithmic matching." Marcus thought about Earth, about the farm drowning under rising water, about his ex-wife who'd left 2 years before the floods came, because she'd seen the future more clearly than he had. He thought about the empty feeling of walking through the colony processing line alone, while other colonists clutched family members. He thought about the very specific flavor of loneliness that came from being the last of a family line with nobody to pass heirloom seeds to. "What happens if I say no?" "Nothing. The program is entirely voluntary. You continue with standard integration protocols." Kess pulled the holoscreen closer to him. "But matches are rare, Marcus. Perhaps 1 in every 1,000 candidates shows sufficient compatibility markers. The algorithm has already identified you as exceptional." "Exceptional at what?" "Failing at terrestrial agriculture." "Exceptional at adaptability, emotional resilience, capacity for commitment despite adverse circumstances, and willingness to find value in partnership between unequal contributors." Kess's expression softened. "Also, your psychological profile indicates you appreciate terrible jokes, which our society considers an essential trait." Marcus surprised himself by laughing. "Okay, that's manipulative but effective." He looked at the questionnaire, watching it pulse with invitation. "If I do this, what's the timeline?" "Complete the assessment today. Processing takes approximately 72 hours. If a match is identified, you'd meet your potential partner at the formal ceremony within a standard week." Meet them at the ceremony. Marcus felt his eyebrows climbing toward his hairline. "That's very traditional." "The algorithm handles introduction. The ceremony handles commitment. We've found that excessive pre-bonding interaction allows anxiety and second-guessing to corrupt compatible pairings." Kess tilted her head, ears rotating thoughtfully. You'd receive basic profile information, of course. Interests, values, general compatibility notes, but the formal meeting occurs at the bonding itself. It was completely insane. It was also, Marcus realized, not substantially crazier than getting on a colony ship to another star system because his planet was drowning. He'd already made one desperate leap into the unknown. What was one more? If I do this and it's terrible, is there an exit clause? Bonding dissolution is possible but socially complex. We prefer to ensure compatibility before formalization. Kess smiled again, less toothy this time. The algorithm works, Marcus. Trust the science. Marcus reached for the holoscreen, his fingers hovering over the acceptance icon. This is either the best decision I'll ever make or the best story I'll ever have for why I'm single. Ideally both, Kess said, her ears chiming softly. He pressed accept, and somewhere in the Voltorian data networks, invisible processes began calculating his future. The questionnaire turned out to be less psychological evaluation and more existential interrogation. Marcus sat in his shipping container residence, holoscreen floating before him, wondering if question 312 was genuinely asking about his tolerance for asymmetrical power dynamics, or if he'd finally cracked from too many nights eating purple-flavored nutrition paste. In a hypothetical partnership where one individual controls significantly more resources than the other, do you believe authentic affection is possible? He read the question aloud to his empty room, which didn't answer because it was a room. Define significantly more resources. Like, my partner has a nicer apartment or my partner owns several planets. The holoscreen pulsed patiently, waiting. Marcus selected yes, if both parties maintain mutual respect regardless of external circumstances, and immediately second-guessed himself. Maybe he should have chosen only with extensive communication and boundary setting. Or possibly, this question makes me uncomfortable, and I'd like to speak to a manager. His communication pad chirped, displaying a message from Chen, a fellow colonist he'd befriended during the 3-month journey. Still filling out your alien marriage application, or have you come to your senses? Marcus typed back, question 406 just asked if I believe love is a choice or a feeling. I think the Voltorians are messing with us. They're definitely messing with us. Rodriguez says the Cultural Integration Office also handles waste management permits. Pretty sure this whole thing is an elaborate prank. Marcus laughed, the sound echoing strangely in his small space. He returned to the questionnaire, working through queries about his views on public visibility, his comfort with ceremonial formality, his opinions on wealth distribution, and one particularly baffling question about whether he preferred morning or evening star positions for optimal emotional regulation. He'd answered, I don't know what this means for that one. 71 hours later, his communication pad exploded with notifications simultaneously. Marcus, who'd been attempting to sleep through Voltoria Prime's shorter night cycle, jolted awake with the kind of adrenaline spike usually reserved for natural disasters. The primary message glowed with official formatting. Compatibility match identified. Candidate profile attached. Formal bonding ceremony scheduled 6 days from receipt of this notification. Please confirm participation. Marcus sat up so fast he hit his head on the sleeping platform's overhead storage. 6 days. He scrolled frantically through the notification. 6 days is not enough time to prepare for marriage. People on Earth planned weddings for years. Entire industries existed around this. The attached profile loaded with agonizing slowness, as if the universe wanted to maximize his anxiety. When it finally appeared, Marcus found himself staring at information that was simultaneously detailed and frustratingly vague. Name: Seraphine. Age: not listed, but Voltorians lived for centuries, so that probably didn't mean much. Interests: economic theory, classical musical compositions, long-term agricultural sustainability, historical architecture, stellar cartography. Values: equity, honesty, practical problem-solving, strategic thinking, appreciation for growth over time. Compatibility rating: 9.8 out of 10. The profile image showed only a silhouette, backlit so he could make out the distinctive pointed ears but no facial features. A note explained that visual introduction occurred at the formal ceremony to prevent superficial bias from affecting the bonding decision. She likes agricultural sustainability, Marcus told his empty room. That's good. That's something. We can talk about crop rotation. That's romantic, right? His communication pad chirped again. Chen, did you get matched or did the algorithm decide you're unmatchable? Matched, ceremony in 6 days. Her name is Seraphine, and she's into economic theory. Economic theory, that's sexy, really gets the heart racing. She also likes agriculture. Stop, I can only handle so much passion. Marcus snorted, typing back a rude gesture emoji that apparently translated across species because the interface accepted it. He confirmed his participation in the ceremony with the kind of fatalistic determination that had characterized most of his major life decisions, then attempted to research Voltorian wedding customs before his brain melted. The information networks were simultaneously helpful and completely overwhelming. Voltorian bonding ceremonies apparently ranged from simple private exchanges to elaborate multi-day festivals depending on social status. The articles mentioned something called scaled appropriateness, where ceremony complexity matched the participants' positions in society, but gave frustratingly few details about how humans fit into this hierarchy. The following morning, Marcus received a notification to report for ceremonial preparation and formal attire configuration. This turned out to be a building near the Cultural Integration Office, where a Voltorian woman with ears so long they'd been tied back with silver thread took one look at him and sighed dramatically. Human proportions, she muttered, circling him with a measuring device that projected light grids across his body. Everything is different ratios. Arms too short, torso too long, shoulders too broad. Sorry for my species' poor design, Marcus offered. Her ears twitched forward. You have good humor. This is important for bonding. Hold still. The measuring process involved standing on a platform, while small floating orbs scanned him from every angle, occasionally emitting beeps that sounded judgmental. The tailor made notes on a holoscreen, her expression cycling through what Marcus interpreted as professional concentration and mild despair. The ceremony will require formal dress, she said finally. Traditional bonding attire adapted for human physiology. The fabric will include adaptive fibers for temperature regulation and biometric monitoring. Biometric monitoring in my wedding clothes. Marcus tried to process this. That's either very practical or deeply concerning. Both, she gestured, and a section of wall transformed into a display showing various designs. Standard human adaptations include simplified fastening systems and reduced ceremonial layering. However, we must maintain appropriate symbolic elements. The designs flowing across the display ranged from subtly elegant to, I'm attending a space opera as the main character. Marcus pointed to one that seemed relatively restrained. That one doesn't look like it requires a manual to put on. The tailor's ears drooped. That is casual social attire. For bonding ceremony, you require formal configuration. She pulled up a different design, something with what appeared to be light-conducting threads woven through dark fabric, structured shoulders, and complex fastening that glowed when activated. That looks expensive, Marcus said weakly. Appropriate expense for appropriate occasion. The tailor began taking additional measurements with instruments that tickled when they passed over his skin. Your partner will be dressed in complementary formal configuration. The matching elements symbolize unity while maintaining individual identity. Over the next few days, Marcus found himself caught in increasingly surreal preparation activities. He attended a brief orientation about Voltorian bonding traditions, where he learned that the ceremony involved something called biosignature binding, using a crystal that would somehow attune to both partners' biological markers. The instructor, a cheerful Voltorian man whose ears were pierced with what looked like tiny musical instruments, assured him this was completely painless and mostly reversible if things go wrong. Mostly reversible is not the reassurance you think it is, Marcus muttered. Chen and several other colonists took him out for what they insisted on calling a bachelor party, despite Marcus's protests that this seemed premature. They ended up at a Voltorian establishment that served drinks which changed color based on the consumer's emotional state. Marcus watched his beverage cycle from blue to purple to something approaching magenta, and decided he didn't want to know what that meant. "You're really doing this," Chen said, his own drink shifting toward green. "Marrying someone you've never met based on alien computer dating. When you say it like that, it sounds insane." "That's because it is insane," Chen grinned. "I'm proud of you. This is either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, and I respect both options." Rodriguez, sitting across from them with a drink that had settled into steady amber, leaned forward. "What if she's terrible? What if the algorithm got it wrong?" Marcus had been asking himself the same question for days. "Then I'll have a really good story about why I'm single in an alien colony, but the compatibility rating was 9.8. That has to mean something. Or it means their computer has a sense of humor," Chen suggested. The night before the ceremony, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay on his sleeping platform, staring at the ceiling, trying to imagine what Seraphine looked like beyond the silhouette. The profile had painted a picture of someone intelligent, thoughtful, interested in systems and long-term thinking. Someone who apparently the algorithm thought would match well with a failed farmer carrying heirloom seeds across the stars. His communication pad displayed the ceremony details. Location provided 12 hours before commencement. Attendees limited to immediate social connections and cultural witnesses. Duration approximately 2 standard hours. Formal dress required. Marcus pulled up the profile one more time, reading through Seraphine's listed interests as if they might reveal hidden secrets. Economic theory, classical music, agricultural sustainability. Maybe she was a researcher. Maybe she worked in colonial development. Maybe she was just someone else looking for connection in the overwhelming strangeness of the universe. He thought about the questionnaires' questions about power imbalances and public visibility and ceremonial formality. He thought about how the tailor had seemed almost reverent when discussing appropriate expense. He thought about how every Voltorian he'd encountered had gotten slightly strange when he mentioned his upcoming bonding, their ears doing complicated rotations he couldn't quite interpret. "The algorithm works," he told the darkness. Kess said the algorithm works. Somewhere in the colony, in whatever residence she occupied, Seraphine was presumably having similar thoughts. Or maybe she was completely calm, secure in the science of compatibility matching. Maybe Voltorians didn't get pre-wedding anxiety. Maybe their 1,000-year lifespans gave them different perspectives on commitment. Marcus finally fell asleep 2 hours before dawn, dreaming of wheat fields under double suns, and a woman with pointed ears teaching him the names of stars he'd never seen from Earth. The ceremony location notification arrived at dawn, and Marcus read the coordinates 3 times before accepting that he wasn't hallucinating from sleep deprivation. The address placed the venue in the Central Administrative District, which he'd assumed was government buildings and important infrastructure, not wedding locations. Chen helped him into the formal attire, which turned out to require 2 people and a surprising amount of coordination. The light-conducting threads activated when Marcus touched specific points on the fasteners, creating subtle patterns that flowed across the dark fabric like bioluminescent currents. "You look like you're about to negotiate a treaty or star in a very expensive commercial," Chen said, adjusting the collar one final time. "I can't decide which. I feel like I'm wearing someone else's life." Marcus examined himself in the mirror, barely recognizing the figure staring back. The formal attire transformed him into someone who looked like they belonged on Voltoria Prime, like they hadn't spent the last decade watching a family farm sink into floodwater. The transport arrived precisely on schedule, a sleek vehicle that made Marcus's previous experience with Voltorian public transit look like practice runs. The interior adjusted to his presence, seats conforming, air temperature shifting, lighting modulating to something the vehicle apparently decided was optimal for pre-ceremony nerves. Destination: Central Administrative Palace Ceremonial Wing, the transport's AI announced in a voice like honey and starlight. Estimated arrival: 14 minutes. Congratulations on your bonding day. Palace, Marcus repeated. The coordinates are for a palace. Correct. The Central Administrative Palace houses facilities for significant cultural events. Marcus felt something cold settling in his stomach. Define significant. Events of notable social, political, or economic importance requiring appropriate ceremonial infrastructure. The transport glided through streets that became progressively more elaborate, buildings shifting from functional colony architecture to structures that looked like they'd been grown rather than built. Other vehicles gave them space, pulling aside in ways that seemed more like deference than traffic courtesy. "This is wrong," Marcus said to the empty transport. "There's been a mistake. I'm a colonist. We don't get palaces." The transport didn't answer, just continued its smooth trajectory toward increasingly impossible architecture. When they finally stopped, Marcus found himself staring at gates that were definitely, absolutely, completely beyond anything that made sense for his life. Guards in formal uniform flanked the entrance, carrying weapons that hummed with barely restrained energy. They straightened as his transport approached, then actually bowed. "This is wrong," Marcus said again. But the transport door was opening, and someone in official dress was gesturing him forward with the kind of polite insistence that didn't allow for argument. The corridors stretched impossibly long, all flowing curves and surfaces that seemed to shift in his peripheral vision. Officials in elaborate dress lined the walls, and every single one of them bowed as he passed. Marcus tried smiling uncertainly at a few, but they just bowed lower, and he decided he was either in a very fancy wedding or a very elaborate kidnapping. His escort, a Voltorian man whose ears were decorated with golden bands, maintained perfect professional silence until they reached a massive door that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of crystal. "The ceremony chamber," the escort said. "Your entrance is scheduled in 3 minutes. Do you require anything before commencement?" "An explanation," Marcus managed. "Maybe several explanations, possibly a manual." The escort's ears tilted in what might have been sympathy. "The ceremony will proceed according to traditional protocols. Please follow the processional indicators and respond to the officiant's prompts. Your partner awaits inside." The doors opened before Marcus could formulate another question, and sound washed over him like a physical force. Not chaos, but the specific quality of silence that came from thousands of people waiting for something to happen. He stepped through, and the processional indicators activated. A path of light leading across what his brain insisted on calling a throne room despite his desperate desire to call it anything else. The chamber soared overhead, space bending in ways that suggested technology he couldn't begin to understand. Floating platforms held what appeared to be camera equipment, or possibly weapons. He couldn't tell anymore. Beings from what had to be dozens of species filled tiered seating that rose toward a ceiling lost in calculated shadow. Holoscreens flickered at the periphery, and Marcus realized with numb horror that this was being broadcast. He walked the lighted path because stopping would require decision-making capacity he no longer possessed. His brain had entered a state of protective shutdown, accepting input without processing meaning. People in seats, cameras recording. Officials in formal dress more elaborate than anything he'd seen. A central platform with a crystal structure that pulsed with internal light. The officiant stood beside the crystal, a Volturian so old their ears had gone silver, wearing robes that seemed woven from starlight and historical importance. They gestured Marcus forward with grave dignity, and he went because his legs apparently still accepted instructions, even if his mind had abandoned all rational function. Then Seraphine entered from the opposite side, and Marcus forgot how breathing worked. She moved like light on water, like music translated into motion, her formal attire making his look like casual dress by comparison. The fabric seemed alive, responding to her movements with colors that shifted through spectrums he didn't have names for. Her hair, so blonde it was nearly white, had been woven with threads that conducted actual light, creating a halo effect that probably violated several laws of physics. Her skin held that same pale luminescence he'd noticed in other Volturians, but more pronounced, as if she'd been carved from moonlight and given animation through sheer cosmic audacity. And her ears, rising elegant and pointed from that impossible hair, were decorated with jewels that Marcus's failing consciousness recognized as actual gemstones, the kind that had their own security details. She reached the platform, standing opposite him across the pulsing crystal, and smiled. It was a gentle smile, almost apologetic, and Marcus felt his brain try to reconcile the warmth in that expression with the absolutely reality-breaking context of everything else. The officiant began speaking in formal Volturian, their words echoing through the chamber with a resonance that suggested either excellent acoustics or additional technology. The translation collar at Marcus's throat pulsed, feeding him understanding he wasn't sure he wanted. We gather to witness the bonding of two souls, the joining of two paths, the union of two lives in partnership and purpose. Marcus's eyes stayed locked on Seraphine, who looked back at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Nervous, hopeful, possibly also wondering if this was really happening. The ceremony proceeded through rituals Marcus barely registered. There were recitations about commitment and mutual respect, something involving symbolic elements he didn't understand, and responses he somehow managed to make at appropriate moments because the officiant gave him prompts. Then the officiant said something that cut through his shock with the precision of a surgical instrument. Queen Seraphine, sovereign of the Volturian throne, administrator of the Central Commercial Authority, controller of the Intersystem Trade Federation, guardian of the Economic Council, holder of the Stellar Trade Accords. The list continued, each title landing like a separate blow to Marcus's understanding of reality. His mind, which had been trying very hard to maintain protective shutdown, suddenly came roaring back online with all the helpful terror he'd been suppressing. Queen. The word echoed in his skull. He was standing across from a queen. Not just any queen, but apparently the queen, the one who controlled things he'd only vaguely heard of and definitely didn't understand. Do you accept this bonding in full knowledge and free will? Seraphine's voice, when she spoke, carried through the chamber like music. I accept. The officiant turned to Marcus, and he saw something that might have been sympathy in those ancient eyes. Marcus Thane, human colonist of Earth origin, agricultural specialist of the third settlement wave, do you accept this bonding in full knowledge and free will? Full knowledge felt like a generous interpretation of his current state. Marcus looked at Seraphine, who was watching him with an expression that had shifted to something vulnerable beneath all that impossible power and beauty. The algorithm had rated them 9.8 compatible. The questionnaire had asked about power imbalances and asymmetrical relationships, and whether he believed love could exist between unequal partners. The universe apparently had a sense of humor so vast it required cosmic scales to properly appreciate. Marcus thought about heirloom seeds carried across stars, about starting over on a drowning planet, about taking desperate leaps into unknown futures because the alternative was standing still while everything collapsed. I accept, he said, and his voice only shook a little. The officiant gestured them forward, and Marcus moved on autopilot, placing his hands over the crystal as instructed. Seraphine's hands met his from the opposite side, her fingers cool and steady. The crystal pulsed, growing brighter, and Marcus felt something warm spreading through his palms, up his arms into his chest. Not painful, just present, like his biology was being tagged with information he couldn't consciously access. "The bonding is sealed," the officiant declared. "Two souls joined, two paths merged, two lives united in partnership witnessed by all assembled." The chamber erupted in sound that might have been applause, or possibly ritual celebration. Marcus stood frozen, his hands still touching Seraphine's across the crystal, trying to process that he just married a queen who controlled half the known galaxy's economy. Seraphine squeezed his fingers gently, and when he met her eyes, she looked almost as terrified as he felt. "We should probably talk," she said softly, her words somehow cutting through the celebration noise. Marcus felt laughter building in his chest, the kind that emerged when reality became too absurd for any other response. "Yes," he managed. "I think we should definitely talk." The reception involved more people than Marcus had seen in his entire life combined. All of them apparently very important and very interested in meeting the human who'd accidentally married their queen. He smiled until his face hurt, shook appendages from species he couldn't name, and accepted congratulations in languages his translation collar struggled to process. Seraphine remained at his side through all of it, her presence somehow both anchoring and absolutely surreal. She would lean close occasionally, whispering context he desperately needed. "That's the Andromedan trade minister, just bow slightly. The one with the crystalline structure is from the Silicon Collective, don't mention carbon-based superiority. If the ambassador from Kepler offers you food, accept it or we'll have a diplomatic incident." Marcus accepted something that looked like it might be sentient and tasted like cinnamon regret. After what felt like several geological epochs, Seraphine touched his arm gently. "We should retreat before the Merchant Council demands a formal audience. I need to explain, and you need to either sit down or possibly scream." "Both," Marcus said, "definitely both." She guided him through corridors that somehow cleared ahead of them, security personnel materializing and dematerializing with practiced efficiency. They ended up in a garden that existed inside the palace complex, under a dome that displayed the night sky with such perfect clarity Marcus suspected it wasn't actually a dome at all, but some kind of controlled atmospheric opening. Seraphine stood beside a fountain that flowed upward in defiance of gravity, her formal attire still glowing with embedded light, and suddenly looked very small despite being the most powerful person he'd ever met. "I entered the matching program anonymously," she said without preamble. "Stripped my profile of all status indicators, all wealth markers, everything except personality metrics and compatibility factors." Marcus sat on a bench that adjusted to his weight, trying to process words while his brain still struggled with the last 6 hours. "Why?" "Because I'm 1,000 years old, Marcus." She turned to face him, and in the starlight he could see something raw in her expression. 1,000 years of people wanting what I represent instead of who I am. Every relationship shaped by my crown before it begins. Every conversation calculated for political advantage. Every smile wondering if it's genuine or strategic. So you catfished the entire matching program. She blinked, her ears rotating in confusion. "Catfished. Earth term. It means pretending to be someone you're not to form connections." Marcus felt hysterical laughter bubbling up again. "Though technically you were being who you are, just without the small detail of being the queen of everything." "I didn't lie." Seraphine moved closer, her hands twisting together in a gesture that looked painfully uncertain on someone who controlled interstellar trade. "Every answer I gave was genuine. My interests, my values, my hopes for partnership. I just removed the context that makes people treat me like a position instead of a person." Marcus thought about the questionnaire, about all those questions on power imbalances and asymmetrical relationships. The algorithm knew. The algorithm knew. She sat beside him, careful to leave space between them. It's designed to match people across all social strata. It flagged you as compatible with me, not with the sovereign of the Voltorian throne, but with Seraphine, who likes economic theory because it's about patterns and people, who thinks agricultural sustainability matters because civilizations are built on stable food systems, who wanted someone who could choose her for reasons that had nothing to do with what she controls. And I did. Marcus stared at the upward-flowing fountain. I chose you based on a profile that said you liked crop rotation and long-term thinking. You chose me before you knew choosing me would change your entire existence. Seraphine's voice went soft. That's what I needed. Someone who could say yes to me without knowing all the terrifying implications. Marcus turned to look at her. This impossible woman with pointed ears and starlight hair, who apparently owned a significant portion of the galaxy's economic infrastructure. You could have told me before the ceremony, given me a chance to run screaming. Would you have? He considered this seriously, thinking about the past week of increasingly bizarre preparation, the palace, the thousands of witnesses, the realization that his wedding was being broadcast across star systems. Probably, almost definitely, yes. And I would have spent another century wondering if anyone could ever choose me without the weight of what that choice means. Seraphine's ears drooped slightly. I'm sorry. I know this is unfair to you. I know you didn't sign up for security details and political implications, and people analyzing your every public appearance for diplomatic significance. Marcus laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the garden. I signed up for an arranged marriage with a complete stranger on an alien planet. I think didn't know what I was getting into was already the foundation of this decision. The Merchant Council is going to demand annulment. Seraphine pulled up a holoscreen with a gesture, displaying what looked like official complaints already queuing. They'll argue you were deceived, that the bonding isn't valid because you didn't have full information. Were they watching the same ceremony I was? The officiant asked if I accepted in full knowledge. I said yes. Marcus felt something settling in his chest, a decision crystallizing. Admittedly, I thought full knowledge meant knowing your name and your interest in agricultural policy, not knowing you control the intersystem economy, but technically I did accept. Seraphine's head snapped up, hope flickering across her features. You're not demanding annulment. I'm demanding explanation, context, possibly therapy, and definitely better preparation for whatever comes next. Marcus reached over, taking her hand carefully. But I accepted the match because the algorithm said we were compatible. 9.8 out of 10. That was before I knew you were royalty, which means the rating was about us, not your crown. The algorithm has never been wrong. Seraphine's fingers curled around his, cool and steady. Then we trust the science. Marcus squeezed gently. Also, I'm a failed farmer from a drowned planet who got on a colony ship with nothing but heirloom seeds and expired certifications. My life was already absurd before this. At least now it's absurd in interesting ways. She laughed, and the sound was nothing like the controlled music of her public voice. It was genuine and slightly broken, and entirely human despite the pointed ears. You're handling this better than I expected. I'm absolutely not handling this. I'm in shock and probably going to panic later. Marcus looked up at the fall sky dome. But I've already done the scared thing, Seraphine. I left Earth knowing I'd never go back. I signed up for alien marriage matching knowing I'd meet my partner at the ceremony. I walked into that chamber today and said yes to you before your approximately 47 titles got listed. The terrifying part is already done. 43 titles, she corrected softly. Some of them are ceremonial redundancies. Oh well, only 43. That's much more reasonable. She smiled, really smiled, and Marcus felt something warm spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the bonding, crystals, biological tagging. What happens now? Now you learn what being married to the queen of everything actually means. Seraphine pulled up additional holoscreens, displaying what looked like schedules and security protocols. There will be briefings on diplomatic expectations, security requirements, public appearance protocols. Your agricultural expertise will suddenly have policy implications for entire star systems. Every opinion you express will be analyzed for political significance. It's going to be overwhelming. More overwhelming than the last 6 hours. Substantially more. She hesitated, but I'll help, we'll figure it out together. That's what partnership means. Even when one partner accidentally failed to mention being sovereign of a galactic power. Marcus thought about Chen's bachelor party, about drinks that changed color with emotion, about friends who'd supported his insane decision to marry a stranger. I'm going to need to bring some people into this. Colonists who became friends. They're going to be insufferable about this. You'll need your own support structure. Seraphine nodded seriously. I can arrange security clearances, housing accommodations, whatever integration support they require. You can just arrange things like that. Marcus, I control the intersystem economy. I can arrange most things. He started laughing again, couldn't help it. Right. My wife controls the intersystem economy. That's my life now. That's a sentence I can say with accuracy. Kes materialized from the shadows, because apparently security chiefs did that, her expression professionally neutral. Your Majesty, the Merchant Council is demanding immediate audience regarding bonding validity. Seraphine stood, her posture shifting into something regal and immovable. Tell the Merchant Council that my bonding is valid, consensual, and sealed according to all traditional protocols. If they wish to argue that my spouse didn't have full knowledge, they're welcome to review the ceremony recording where he clearly accepted despite not running away screaming during the title recitation. They'll argue he didn't understand the implications, Kes said. Then they're arguing that ignorance invalidates consent, which would overturn about 60% of our existing bonding law. Seraphine's voice carried an edge Marcus hadn't heard before. Marcus accepted me before knowing what that meant. That makes his acceptance more genuine than any I've received in a millennium. Marcus stood as well, moving to stand beside her. Also, I'm standing right here and can confirm that I accept, present tense, currently. Even knowing about the 43 titles and the scary security chief and whatever political nightmare is about to unfold. Kes's ears rotated forward, the Voltorian equivalent of a smile. I'll convey your position to the council. After she left, Seraphine turned to Marcus with an expression of wonder. You're really staying. I'm really staying. Marcus took both her hands, feeling the warmth of the bonding resonance still humming beneath his skin. I came to Voltoria Prime to start over, to find something worth building after everything on Earth fell apart. The algorithm said you were compatible with that goal. I'm choosing to trust it, even if it has a twisted sense of humor about scale. It's going to be complicated. Everything worth doing is complicated. Marcus thought about 6 generations of farmers, about heirloom seeds carried across stars, about the specific courage required to plant things knowing you might not see the harvest. I'm good at complicated. I'm less good at giving up. Seraphine kissed him then, careful and questioning, and Marcus kissed her back, tasting stardust and possibility and the specific flavor of hope that came from taking absurd risks on insufficient information. When they broke apart, she was crying, silver tears tracking down pale cheeks. I searched for so long. I know, Marcus said, and discovered he meant it. So did I. Above them, the false sky displayed constellations from both their worlds, Earth and Voltoria, mapped together in patterns neither had seen before. Somewhere in the palace, the Merchant Council was probably drafting formal complaints. Somewhere in the colony, Chen was going to lose his mind laughing. Somewhere in the quantum probability space where compatibility algorithms calculated futures, a 9.8 rating pulsed with vindication. Marcus had accepted an arranged marriage expecting to find a partner. He'd found a queen instead, which was either the universe's idea of a joke or its peculiar way of saying that sometimes the most honest choices were the ones made in beautiful ignorance. Either way, he'd said yes, and he meant it, and that would have to be enough for whatever came next.